The car exploded into the night before anyone could scream. Dante Morty felt the heat first, then the sound, then nothing at all. One moment he was stepping out of the black sedan outside his private club, straightening his jacket, checking the time on his watch. The next moment the world turned white, and his body was thrown across the pavement like a piece of paper caught in the wind. Smoke rose into the sky. Alarms wailed from nearby buildings. People ran in every direction screaming while the fire spread across the wreckage of the car that had carried him for the past 6 years. Somewhere in the chaos, a man in a dark coat watched from a rooftop across the street, lowering a small device in his hand. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Nobody who worked for Dante Morty had ever imagined this night would come. He was a man who controlled half the ports, who decided which trucks moved through the city and which never reached their destination, who shook hands with judges and senators alike. He was not supposed to be vulnerable. He was not supposed to bleed. But he did. By the time his men reached him, Dante was barely breathing. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven movements. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading. His eyes were half open, unfocused, staring at nothing. One of his closest guards, a broad man named Victor, knelt beside him and pressed a hand against the wound, shouting orders that nobody around him could process fast enough. "Get the car. Now, not the hospital, the safe house. Call her. Call Elena." Those words would matter more than anyone in that moment could understand. Word spread through the city faster than fire. Within an hour, rumors filled every corner of the underworld. Some said Dante Morty was already dead, his body left in the wreckage of his car. Others said he had been taken somewhere to die quietly, away from prying eyes. Rival families began making calls, testing the silence, waiting to see who would speak for the empire Dante had built. In a quiet apartment across town, a woman named Elena Marchetti received a call at exactly 11:42 at night. She did not recognize the number, but something told her to answer anyway. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless, speaking too fast. "They tried to kill him. He's alive, but barely. We need you now." Elena did not ask questions. She grabbed her coat, slipped on her shoes, and walked out into the cold night without a second thought. She had known this call might come one day. She had simply hoped it never would. The safe house was nothing like the world Dante usually lived in. No marble floors, no crystal chandeliers, no rows of guards standing at attention. It was a modest 2-story building on the edge of the city, disguised as an abandoned warehouse from the outside, but carefully secured on the inside. Only a handful of people knew it existed. Fewer still knew where it was. When Elena arrived, the sight that greeted her nearly stopped her heart. Dante lay on a makeshift bed in the center of a dim room, machines beeping quietly beside him, his skin pale as paper. Victor stood near the door, his face tight with worry, while a private doctor worked carefully over Dante's wounds, murmuring instructions to an assistant. "How bad is it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor did not look up from his work. "Bad enough that if word gets out he's alive, someone will finish what they started. He needs rest, silence. No visitors, no noise. If his heart stops trying to fight and starts giving in to shock, he won't survive the week." Elena stepped closer, ignoring the doctor's warning look. She knelt beside the bed and took Dante's hand in hers. It was cold, far too cold for a man who had once radiated so much strength and certainty. She studied his face, searching for any sign of the man she had known for years, the man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders yet always managed to soften when he was around her. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Victor watched the exchange with a complicated expression. He had known Elena for years, had seen the way Dante's guarded eyes changed whenever she entered a room, but he had never fully understood the depth of what existed between them. Now, Watching her refuse to let go of Dante's hand even as the doctor tried to usher her aside, he began to understand. "We need to make a decision," Victor said quietly, pulling the doctor aside. "If the family finds out he's still breathing, they'll try again. We need the world to believe he's gone." The doctor nodded slowly. "A death that isn't real. It's the only way to buy him time to heal." And so, within hours, a plan began to take shape. A plan built on silence, secrecy, and the fragile hope that a dying man could be brought back from the edge before his enemies discovered the truth. The official story would spread by morning. Dante Morty, boss of the Morty family, had died in an explosion outside his club. No funeral would be held, yet they would claim, out of respect for an ongoing investigation. In truth, there was no investigation. There was only a locked room, a struggling heartbeat, and one woman who refused to walk away. By dawn, news of Dante's death had reached every corner of the city. Television stations spoke of the shocking loss of a powerful businessman, careful never to use the word mafia on air, though everyone watching understood exactly who he was and what he represented. Rival families gathered in secret meetings, some celebrating quietly, others already plotting how to seize control of the territory Dante once ruled. Inside the Morty organization, panic spread like wildfire. Men who had once feared Dante's name now scrambled to protect themselves, unsure who to trust, unsure who might be next. Some began making quiet calls to rival bosses, offering loyalty in exchange for protection. Others locked their doors and waited, watching the streets for signs of an attack that could come from any direction. At the center of it all stood a man named Antonio Bellini, Dante's second in command for over a decade. Antonio had always been loyal, or so everyone believed. But loyalty in that world was a fragile thing, and with Dante gone, or so it seemed, Antonio found himself standing at a crossroads. He could step forward and claim leadership, uniting the shattered pieces of the organization under his control. Or he could watch it all collapse into chaos, torn apart by rivals eager to claim what was left. He chose to step forward. Within a day, Antonio called a meeting of the family's most trusted men, gathering them in a private room above a restaurant that had served as neutral ground for years. He stood at the head of the table, his expression calm despite the storm raging beneath the surface. "Dante built something strong," he began, his voice steady. "But strength without leadership crumbles. I've stood beside him since the beginning. I know how he thought, how he moved, how he protected what was his. I intend to protect it now in his memory." Murmurs spread through the room. Some men nodded in agreement, relieved to have someone step into the void. Others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to trust a man who seemed almost too ready to take control the moment his boss had fallen. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that less than 3 miles away, in a hidden room behind reinforced walls, Dante Morty's heart was still beating, faint but present, fighting against the darkness pulling him under. Alina stayed by his side through that first night and into the next day, refusing every suggestion that she rest or return home. She sat in a chair beside his bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, listening to the quiet beep of the machine that tracked his heartbeat. Every so often, his fingers would twitch, and her breath would catch, hoping it meant he was fighting his way back to consciousness. But each time, his body would settle again into stillness. Victor brought her food she barely touched and coffee that grew cold beside her untouched. He tried more than once to convince her to leave, if only for an hour, but she refused every time. "You've been here for over 20 hours, Victor said gently, standing in the doorway. "You need rest." "I'm not tired," Alina replied, though the dark circles beneath her eyes told a different story. "If I leave and something happens, I'll never forgive myself." Victor studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You really love him." It wasn't a question, but Alina answered anyway. I've loved him since before any of this started, before the empire, before the danger, before any of it. I loved the man he was before the world turned him into someone people feared. Victor said nothing more. He simply nodded and left the room, leaving Alina alone with the quiet hum of machines and the fragile hope that the man she loved would open his eyes again. Outside the safe house, the city continued to shift and change with every passing hour. Rumors about Dante's death evolved into stories about his enemies, whispers about who might have ordered the attack, and theories about which family would rise to claim the power he left behind. Nobody suspected the truth. Nobody imagined that the man they believed dead was lying just miles away, held together by machines, medicine, and the unwavering presence of one woman who refused to give up on him. As the sun set on the second day, the doctor returned to check on Dante's condition, his expression grave as he reviewed the numbers on the monitor beside the bed. "His body is fighting," the doctor said quietly to Alina, who had not moved from her chair in hours. "But it's a delicate fight. If his condition doesn't stabilize soon, we may not have the outcome we're hoping for." Alina's hands tightened around Dante's cold fingers. "How long?" The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The next several days will tell us everything. If his body can hold on, if the swelling reduces, if infection doesn't set in, he has a chance. But it will not be easy, and it will not be quick." Alina nodded, swallowing the fear rising in her throat. She looked down at Dante's still face, memorizing every detail as though committing it to memory could somehow keep him anchored to the world. "Then we wait," she whispered, "together however long it takes." Outside the window, the city lights flickered against the darkening sky, unaware that the man they believed had vanished from the world was still there, quietly fighting to return. And inside that small, hidden room, one woman sat beside him, refusing to let go, refusing to leave, holding on to a love that had never once wavered, even when the entire world believed there was nothing left to hold on to. The first day had passed. 8 more were still ahead, each one heavier and more uncertain than the last. But Alina Marchetti had made her choice the moment she answered that phone call in the middle of the night. And nothing, not fear, not exhaustion, not even the growing danger closing in around them, would change her mind now. She would stay until he opened his eyes again, however long it took. Alina Marchetti had not always known the world of danger she now found herself trapped inside. Years earlier, she had been a young nurse working long shifts at a busy hospital, her days filled with charts, medications, and the quiet exhaustion that came with caring for strangers. She had never imagined her life would one day be tied to a man like Dante Morti, a man whose name alone could silence a room. They met on a night that neither of them had planned. Dante had been brought into the hospital after a car accident, though even then, the details of what truly happened remained unclear. Alina had been assigned to his care, unaware of who he was or what his name meant outside those hospital walls. To her, he was simply a patient, quiet and guarded, watching her with careful eyes as she checked his vitals and adjusted his medication. He did not speak much during those first few days, but Alina noticed things about him that others might have missed. The way his eyes softened slightly whenever she entered the room. The way he thanked her, sincerely, for the smallest gestures of kindness. The way he seemed almost surprised that someone treated him without fear or expectation, simply as another human being in need of care. It was weeks before Alina learned the truth about who he was. By then, it no longer mattered. She had already seen the man beneath the reputation, the quiet vulnerability hidden beneath layers of control and power. When his men finally came to escort him home, fully healed, he lingered at the door of the hospital room, turning back to look at her one last time. "Thank you," he had said simply, "for treating me like a person, not a name." Alina never expected to see him again. But 3 months later, a bouquet of flowers arrived at the hospital with a note attached. No name, no explanation, just a simple message. I have not forgotten your kindness." From there, their connection slowly grew, quiet dinners turning into long conversations, careful visits turning into something neither of them had planned but neither wanted to stop. Dante never asked her to be part of his world, not directly. He understood the danger that came with his name, the risks that followed anyone close to him. But Alina had made her choice long ago, the same choice she had made the night she answered that frantic phone call. She chose him, fully aware of what that meant. Now, sitting beside his hospital bed in the hidden safe house, watching the slow rhythm of his breathing, Alina reflected on everything that had led her to this moment. She thought of every quiet dinner, every late-night conversation, every small moment of tenderness that the world outside would never associate with a man like Dante Morti. To everyone else, he was a name whispered with fear. To her, he was simply the man who had once thanked her for kindness, who still, even now, held a piece of gentleness beneath the armor he wore for the world. The third day arrived with little change. Dante's condition remained fragile, hovering in that uncertain space between recovery and decline. The doctor visited twice daily, adjusting medications, monitoring his vitals, offering careful words of encouragement that never fully eased the tension in the room. Alina barely left his side, sleeping only in short bursts in the chair beside his bed, waking at the smallest sound or shift in his breathing. Outside the safe house, the situation in the city had grown increasingly tense. Antonio Bellini had solidified his position as the acting leader of the Morti organization, though whispers of doubt continued to circulate among the older members who had known Dante longest. Some believed Antonio's quick rise to power was simply practical, a necessary step to protect what remained of the family's interests. Others wondered if his ambition ran deeper than anyone realized. Victor, who remained one of the few people aware that Dante was still alive, found himself walking a dangerous line. He continued attending meetings, nodding along with Antonio's decisions, all while quietly returning to the safe house each night to check on his true boss. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on him, but he understood the necessity of the deception. If even a hint of the truth reached the wrong ears, Dante's fragile chance at survival would vanish entirely. "They're getting restless," Victor told Alina quietly one evening, standing near the doorway of the room where Dante lay unconscious. "Antonio is making moves, consolidating power. Some of the men are starting to ask questions about the funeral, about when it will happen." Alina looked up, her exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "What are you telling them?" "That the family needs time to grieve privately before any public services. It's buying us time, but not much of it." Alina nodded slowly, understanding the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Every day that passed without answers made the deception more difficult to sustain, and every day that passed without change in Dante's condition made the fear inside her grow heavier. That night alone with him once again, Alina found herself speaking softly, though she knew he could not hear her, or at least, she believed he could not. "You always told me you weren't afraid of anything," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "But I know that isn't true. I saw it that night at the hospital all those years ago." "You were afraid then too. Afraid of trusting someone, afraid of being seen as anything other than untouchable. I'm not afraid of you, Dante. I never was. And I'm not leaving now, no matter how afraid I am of losing you." The machines beside the bed continued their steady rhythm, a quiet reminder that somewhere beneath the stillness, his heart continued its fight. Days 4 and 5 brought small, uncertain signs of progress. Dante's fever, which had spiked dangerously on the third night, began to slowly decrease. His breathing, once shallow and inconsistent, grew steadier beneath the careful watch of the doctor's monitoring equipment. Still, he remained unconscious, trapped somewhere between the world of the living and the darkness that had nearly claimed him. Alina allowed herself small moments of hope during those days, though she was careful never to let her guard down completely. She had seen enough in her years as a nurse to understand how quickly hope could turn to devastation in situations like this. Still, she held on to every small improvement as though it were a lifeline, a promise that the man she loved might yet return to her. Outside, the tension in the city continued to build. Rival families, sensing weakness in the wake of Dante's apparent death, began testing the boundaries of Morty territory, sending subtle signals meant to provoke a response. Antonio, determined to prove his capability as leader, found himself forced into a series of difficult decisions, each one carrying consequences that rippled through the fragile balance of power in the underworld. Meanwhile, the man in the rooftop shadow who had triggered the explosion outside Dante's club remained a mystery. No one had come forward to claim responsibility, and no clear enemy had emerged as the obvious culprit. This uncertainty only deepened the unease spreading through the organization, as everyone, from the highest-ranking members to the newest recruits, began quietly wondering who among them might not be who they claimed to be. Victor, increasingly wary of the shifting dynamics within the family, began paying closer attention to the conversations happening around him. He noticed subtle changes in Antonio's behavior, a growing confidence that seemed to arrive too quickly for a man who had never sought leadership before. He noticed, too, the careful way certain members avoided discussing the details of the attack, deflecting questions with practiced ease. He said nothing of his suspicions to anyone but Alina, sharing his concerns during one of his nightly visits to the safe house. "Something doesn't feel right," Victor admitted, his voice low. "Antonio moved too fast, too smoothly. It's almost like he expected this to happen." Alina's eyes widened slightly at the implication. "You think he had something to do with the attack?" "I don't know," Victor admitted honestly, "but I intend to find out, quietly, carefully. If Dante wakes up, he'll need to know exactly who he can trust and who he can't." The weight of that uncertainty settled over the room, mixing with the already heavy tension that filled every hour spent waiting for change. Alina returned her attention to Dante, studying his face for any sign of awareness, any flicker of movement that might indicate he was closer to returning to them. By the end of the 5th day, the doctor delivered news that brought the first real sense of relief since the ordeal began. Dante's vital signs had stabilized considerably, his fever had broken entirely, and though he remained unconscious, his body showed clear signs of healing rather than declining. "It's a good sign," the doctor explained, checking the monitors carefully. "His body has stopped fighting simply to survive and started fighting to recover. That's a significant shift. It doesn't mean he's out of danger completely, but it means the worst may be behind him." Alina felt tears sting her eyes for the first time since the ordeal began, tears of relief rather than fear. She had spent 5 days bracing herself for devastating news, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, Dante might truly make it through. That night, sitting beside him as she had every night before, Alina allowed herself a small, fragile smile. "You're going to come back to me," she whispered, holding his hand gently in hers. "I know you are. You've never given up on anything in your life, and I know you won't give up on this either." Outside the safe house walls, the city continued its restless dance of suspicion and shifting power, unaware that the man believed lost to them all was slowly, quietly, finding his way back from the edge of darkness. And beside him, as she had been from the very first moment, Alina remained steady, patient, and unwavering, a quiet anchor in the middle of a storm that showed no signs of settling any time soon. 4 days remained. 4 days that would test every ounce of strength Alina had left, and reveal truths about loyalty, betrayal, and love that none of them could yet imagine. The 6th day began with an unexpected visitor arriving at the edge of the district, where the safe house stood hidden. A woman named Grace Ellison, a longtime associate of the Morty family and one of the few people outside Dante's inner circle who had ever earned his trust, appeared at the warehouse gates asking for Victor by name. She claimed to have information about the attack, information she said could not wait. Victor met her cautiously, choosing a neutral location several streets away from the safe house to avoid drawing attention to its location. Grace, a sharp woman with a reputation for gathering information others could not, wasted no time getting to the point. "The device used in the explosion," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "It wasn't something a rival family typically uses. It was precise, controlled, designed to look like an accident rather than an obvious attack. That kind of work points to someone with inside knowledge, someone who knew exactly where Dante would be standing and when." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're saying this wasn't an outside job?" "I'm saying you should be very careful about who you trust right now," Grace replied. "Someone close to Dante wanted him gone, and they wanted it to look like the work of an enemy." The information settled heavily over Victor as he made his way back to the safe house that evening. He replayed every interaction he'd had with Antonio over the past week, searching for cracks in the careful composure the man had displayed since stepping into leadership. Everything Antonio had done seemed calculated, precise, almost as though he had been preparing for this moment long before it arrived. When Victor shared Grace's information with Alina later that night, her expression grew troubled. If Antonio really is behind this, and Dante wakes up walking back into a world where his own second-in-command tried to have him killed, what happens then? "Then we make sure Dante has every piece of information he needs before he steps foot outside these walls," Victor answered firmly. "We can't let him walk into a trap the moment he recovers." The tension inside the safe house deepened with each passing hour, though outwardly little changed. Dante remained unconscious, his body continuing its slow, steady healing, unaware of the storm building around the empire he once controlled with such certainty. On the seventh day, something remarkable happened. Just after sunrise, as Alina sat half asleep in the chair beside his bed, she felt the faintest pressure against her hand. She opened her eyes immediately, staring down at Dante's fingers, which had curled slightly around hers. Her heart raced as she leaned closer, searching his face for any further sign of awareness. "Dante, can you hear me?" For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly his eyelids fluttered, though they did not fully open. A quiet, strained breath escaped his lips, the first sound he had made since the night of the attack. Alina called for the doctor immediately, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. The doctor arrived within minutes, carefully examining Dante's responses, checking his pupils, monitoring the subtle changes in his vital signs. "This is a good sign," the doctor confirmed, though his tone remained cautious. "His brain is responding to stimulation. He may be closer to waking than we anticipated, but we need to remain patient. The body decides these things on its own timeline, not ours." Despite the doctor's caution, a renewed sense of hope filled the room that day. Alina spoke to Dante constantly now, narrating small details of the world around him, reminding him gently of moments they had shared together, encouraging him with quiet, steady words meant to guide him back toward consciousness. Meanwhile, outside the safe house, the situation within the Morty organization had grown increasingly volatile. Rumors had begun circulating that questioned the timing and manner of Dante's supposed death, some members quietly wondering why no body had been presented for a proper funeral, others growing suspicious of how quickly Antonio had assumed control. Antonio, sensing the growing unease among certain members, called for another meeting, this time addressing the concerns directly. "I understand there are questions," he said, standing before the gathered men with practiced confidence. "Grief affects people differently, and I know some of you are struggling to accept what happened, but I assure each of you, My only goal is to protect what Dante built. We will honor him properly once the danger surrounding his death has passed." Not everyone in the room appeared convinced. An older member named Leonard Pierce, who had served the family for over 20 years, raised his hand slowly. "With respect, Antonio, it feels as though we're being kept in the dark. If there's a threat out there capable of taking down a man like Dante Morty, don't we deserve to know what we're facing?" Antonio's expression remained calm, though something flickered briefly behind his eyes. "The investigation is ongoing. The moment I have concrete answers, I will share them. Until then, I ask for your patience and your trust." The meeting ended without full resolution, the underlying tension remaining unresolved beneath the surface. Leonard left the gathering troubled, his suspicion growing with every passing day that answers continued to be withheld. Back at the safe house, the 8th day arrived with a mixture of anticipation and lingering uncertainty. Dante's responses had grown slightly more frequent, small movements of his hands, occasional sounds escaping his lips, faint flickers of his eyes beneath closed lids. The doctor remained cautiously optimistic, explaining that full consciousness could arrive at any moment, though the exact timing remained impossible to predict. Elena barely left his side during those final hours, exhaustion weighing heavily on her, though determination kept her anchored firmly in place. She thought often of the conversation Victor had shared with her about Grace's warning, wondering how she would find the strength to tell Dante the truth about the possible betrayal waiting for him once he returned to the world outside these walls. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the room grew dim with the fading light, Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The years of quiet dinners and stolen conversations. The unspoken understanding between them that had grown slowly into something neither of them could deny. The fear she had carried every single day, knowing that loving a man like Dante Morty meant accepting the danger that came with his world. She had never once regretted her choice, not through every sleepless night, not through every moment of uncertainty, not even now, sitting beside him as he fought his way back from the edge of death. "Come back to me," she whispered again, pressing his hand gently between both of hers. "Whatever waits for you out there, whatever truths you'll have to face, I'll be right beside you. I promise." Victor arrived later that night, his expression tense as he pulled Elena aside, away from Dante's bedside. "Leonard Pierce came to me today," he said quietly. "He doesn't trust Antonio. He's not the only one. If we're right about what happened, there might be others willing to stand with Dante once the truth comes out." Elena absorbed the information carefully, weighing the fragile hope it offered against the danger still surrounding them. "We need to be careful. If Antonio suspects anyone is questioning his leadership, he might act before Dante has the chance to recover fully." Victor nodded grimly. "I know, that's why we need him to wake up soon." Every day that passes gives Antonio more time to strengthen his position. The weight of their situation pressed heavily over the room as the 8th day drew to a close, the fragile balance between hope and danger growing more delicate with each passing hour. Somewhere beneath the surface of his unconsciousness, Dante Morty continued his slow return to the world he once commanded so completely, unaware of the storm waiting for him the moment he opened his eyes. Elena remained beside him through the night, watching the steady rhythm of his breathing, holding tightly to the promise she had made herself the very first night this ordeal began. She would stay until he returned to her, no matter what waited for them once he did. One day remained, one day that would decide everything. The 9th day arrived quietly, the pale light of early morning filtering through the narrow window of the safe house. Elena had barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams as she kept her hand wrapped around Dante's throughout the night. It was somewhere near dawn, the room still dim and silent, when she felt his fingers tighten suddenly around hers. Her eyes snapped open immediately. She looked down to find Dante's eyes open, unfocused at first, blinking slowly as they adjusted to the dim light around him. "Dante," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. His lips parted, though no sound emerged at first. He blinked again, his gaze slowly sharpening as it settled on her face. A faint, weak smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Alina," he rasped, his voice barely audible, rough from days of silence. Tears spilled freely down Alina's face as she leaned closer, gently cupping his face in her hands. "You're awake. You're really awake." Dante's eyes moved slowly around the unfamiliar room, confusion evident in his expression as he tried to piece together fragments of memory. "Where? What happened?" "You were attacked," Alina explained softly, choosing her words carefully. "Outside the club. You've been unconscious for 9 days. We had to make everyone believe you were gone to protect you while you healed." Dante absorbed the information slowly, his mind still fogged from days of unconsciousness. He tried to sit up, but a sharp wince crossed his face as pain radiated through his body. "Easy," Alina said gently, placing a steadying hand against his chest. "You're still healing. Don't push yourself." The doctor arrived within minutes of being alerted, conducting a careful examination of Dante's condition, checking his responses, testing his strength, monitoring every subtle sign of his recovery. Though weak and disoriented, Dante's vital signs showed remarkable improvement, confirming what Alina had hoped for through every long, uncertain night. "You're going to make a full recovery," the doctor confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "It will take time, patience, and rest, but the worst is behind you." Once the doctor stepped away, Victor entered the room, his expression a mixture of relief and urgency. He approached the bed carefully, offering a respectful nod toward his boss. "Good to see you awake," Victor said, though his tone carried an underlying weight that suggested more pressing matters waited beneath the surface. Dante studied him carefully, sensing the tension in the room. "Tell me what's happened, everything." Victor exchanged a brief glance with Alina before beginning to explain the events of the past 9 days. He described the chaos that erupted following the attack, the panic that spread through the organization, and Antonio's swift rise to leadership in the wake of Dante's apparent death. Dante listened silently, his expression darkening as the details unfolded. When Victor mentioned Grace's information about the precision of the attack, the likelihood that someone within the family itself had orchestrated the betrayal, Dante's jaw tightened visibly. "Antonio," he said quietly, more statement than question. "We don't have concrete proof," Victor admitted. "But the timing, the way he moved so quickly to secure his position, it all points toward involvement. There are others starting to question him too. Leonard Pierce, among others." Dante remained silent for a long moment, processing the weight of the betrayal. Despite the physical pain still radiating through his body, something sharper and more dangerous settled into his eyes, the quiet fury of a man realizing the depth of the deception surrounding him. "He was like a brother to me," Dante said finally, his voice low. "I trusted him with everything." Alina placed a gentle hand against his arm, offering silent comfort in the face of such a painful realization. Dante glanced toward her, something softening briefly in his expression, despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You stayed," he said quietly, "through all of it." "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," Alina replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. Dante studied her carefully, the weight of her loyalty settling over him in a way that seemed to strengthen his resolve even through the exhaustion still gripping his body. "I won't forget this, Alina. Not what you did, not what it cost you." The following hours passed in careful planning, Dante insisting on being informed of every detail despite his continued weakness. Victor relayed information about the state of the organization, the shifting loyalties among the men, the growing unease surrounding Antonio's leadership. Alina remained close throughout, ensuring Dante did not push himself beyond what his healing body could handle, though she understood the urgency now driving him forward. "I need to know who I can trust," Dante said later that day, his voice growing slightly stronger as the hours passed. "Before I make any move, I need a clear picture of where everyone stands." Victor nodded firmly. "I've already started reaching out quietly to a few of the older members. Leonard Pierce, for one. He's been vocal about his doubts regarding Antonio's leadership. There may be others willing to stand with you once they know the truth." "And Antonio," Dante asked, "what's he been telling the others?" "That he's protecting your legacy," Victor answered. "That he intends to honor your memory once the danger has passed, but it's clear he's positioning himself permanently. Every decision he's made has strengthened his own control rather than preserved what you built." Dante's expression hardened further, a cold, calculated resolve settling over his features despite the physical toll of his recovery. "Then we need to move carefully. If Antonio realizes I'm alive before we're ready, he'll act immediately to eliminate the threat I represent to his position." Alina listened to the exchange with growing unease, understanding the danger that lay ahead even as relief over Dante's recovery continued to wash over her. She had spent 9 days fighting to keep him alive, only to now face the reality that his survival marked the beginning of an entirely new battle, one that would test not only his strength but the loyalty of everyone around him. That evening, as Dante rested, and Victor left to continue gathering information quietly among trusted allies, Alina sat beside the bed once more, watching him with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "You should rest," she said softly, noticing the exhaustion still evident despite his determination to push forward. "You've only just woken up." "I've rested enough," Dante replied, though his voice carried a tired edge that betrayed his own body's limitations. "Every day I remain hidden is another day Antonio strengthens his grip on what should be mine." Alina reached for his hand, holding it gently. "I understand your urgency, but you won't be able to face any of this if your body isn't strong enough to carry you through it. Let yourself heal, even just a little more." Dante studied her for a long moment, something softening in his expression, as the weight of exhaustion finally began to outweigh his determination. He allowed himself to settle back against the pillow, his hand remaining wrapped around hers. "9 days," he murmured quietly. "You stayed through all of it." "I would stay through 900 if that's what it took," Alina replied softly. A faint, genuine smile touched Dante's lips, the first true moment of warmth since his return to consciousness. "I don't deserve someone like you." "You've never had to deserve it," Alina said gently. "I chose this. I chose you. That was never something you needed to earn." As night settled fully over the city outside, Dante drifted into a more peaceful sleep, his body finally beginning the deeper stages of healing it desperately needed. Alina remained beside him, watching over him just as she had every night before, though now, for the first time in 9 long days, hope had fully replaced the fear that had gripped her heart since the very beginning. Somewhere across the city, Antonio Bellini sat alone in his newly claimed office, reviewing reports and solidifying plans for the days ahead, entirely unaware that the man he believed dead was, at that very moment, quietly planning his return. The empire Antonio believed he had claimed for himself remained, in truth, only borrowed, waiting for its rightful owner to reclaim what had always been his. The following days brought steady improvement in Dante's condition, his strength slowly returning as his body continued its recovery. Victor moved carefully through the city, gathering allies among those who had grown suspicious of Antonio's rapid rise to power, while Alina remained a steady, comforting presence throughout Dante's continued healing. Leonard Pierce, upon learning the truth from Victor, wept openly at the news that Dante remained alive, his loyalty to the Morty family running deeper than even Victor had realized. He pledged his full support immediately, offering not only his own allegiance but the quiet loyalty of several other longtime members who shared his growing distrust of Antonio's leadership. Slowly, carefully, a plan began to take shape, one built not on violence or immediate confrontation, but on strategy, patience, and the careful exposure of truth. Dante understood that reclaiming his position required more than physical strength. It required proving, beyond any doubt, the depth of Antonio's betrayal to those who still remained uncertain of where their loyalty belonged. As the days passed and Dante's strength continued to grow, so too did his resolve. The empire he had built over decades would not be stolen from him, not by betrayal, not by deception, and certainly not without a fight. But this fight would be fought with intelligence and patience rather than recklessness, guided by the lessons of the 9 days he had spent fighting simply to survive. And through it all, Elena remained by his side, just as she had promised from the very first night, ready to face whatever challenges still lay ahead together. 3 weeks passed before Morty felt strong enough to leave the safe house that had sheltered him through his darkest days. His strength had returned gradually, each day bringing him closer to the man he had once been, though something within him had shifted permanently since the night of the attack. He moved now with a quiet, calculated patience, no longer driven purely by instinct, but by careful strategy shaped through 9 days of vulnerability he would never forget. Victor and Leonard had spent those weeks carefully building a network of loyal allies, individuals who had grown increasingly uneasy with Antonio's leadership and welcomed the truth of Dante's survival with quiet relief. Grace continued gathering information from the shadows, uncovering further evidence that confirmed what they had already suspected. Antonio had indeed orchestrated the attack, working quietly with a smaller rival family eager to weaken the Morty organization from within, promising him a share of power once Dante had been eliminated. Armed with this knowledge, Dante called for a private meeting, one that would take place away from prying eyes, attended only by those whose loyalty had been carefully confirmed. The gathering took place in the same restaurant where Antonio had once claimed leadership, though this time, the atmosphere carried a very different energy. As the trusted members filed into the room, murmurs of shock and disbelief spread the moment Dante entered, standing tall despite the lingering weakness in his frame. Leonard Pierce was the first to step forward, his eyes filled with emotion as he clasped Dante's hand firmly. "We thought we lost you," Leonard said, his voice thick with relief. "You nearly did," Dante replied evenly, his gaze sweeping over the room. "But I'm back now, and it's time the truth came to light." One by one, the gathered members listened as Dante calmly laid out the evidence Victor and Grace had carefully compiled, detailing Antonio's involvement in the attack and his quiet arrangement with a rival family eager to see the Morty organization crumble from within. Shock rippled through the room, followed quickly by anger as loyal members realized the depth of the betrayal that had nearly cost them everything. "What happens now?" one of the younger members asked cautiously. "Now," Dante said calmly, "we take back what belongs to us, quietly, carefully, and without unnecessary chaos. Antonio will answer for what he's done, but this will not become a war that tears apart everything I've spent decades building." The following day, Dante arranged a private meeting with Antonio himself, choosing neutral ground once again to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Antonio arrived expecting a routine discussion regarding ongoing family matters, his confidence still firmly intact after weeks of unchallenged leadership. The moment Dante stepped into the room, Antonio's expression shifted instantly from confident composure to visible shock. His face drained of color as he stared at the man he believed had died weeks earlier, standing very much alive before him. "Dante," Antonio managed finally, his voice barely steady, "this isn't how." 9 days, Dante said calmly, taking a seat across from him. 9 days I spent fighting simply to stay alive, while you moved quickly to claim everything I built. Tell me, Antonio, did you know the moment they carried me from that explosion that I would survive? Or were you simply hoping I wouldn't? Antonio's composure crumbled entirely under the weight of Dante's steady gaze. He opened his mouth several times, searching for words that never fully formed, his carefully constructed confidence dissolving into visible panic. I did what I thought was necessary, Antonio finally admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The organization needed stability. Someone had to step forward. You didn't step forward, Dante replied evenly, his tone carrying quiet, controlled fury. You orchestrated my death to create the opportunity. You worked with outsiders against your own family, against me. Antonio said nothing further, his silence confirming everything Dante already knew. The weight of his betrayal settled heavily over the room, the consequences of his actions now impossible to escape. Dante did not raise his voice, nor did he allow the situation to escalate into unnecessary confrontation. Instead, he calmly explained the terms of what would happen next. Antonio would step away entirely from the organization, relinquishing any claim to power or involvement in family matters. His departure would be quiet, permanent, and absolute. In exchange for this quiet resolution, Dante offered him the chance to leave the city entirely, starting somewhere far away from the world he had tried so desperately to control. It was not mercy born from weakness, but rather from Dante's understanding that stability, not further chaos, was what his organization needed most in the wake of everything that had happened. Antonio, recognizing he had no other viable option, accepted the terms quietly, leaving the city within days, never to return. With Antonio's departure, the fractured pieces of the Morty organization slowly began to heal. Loyal members who had wavered during the uncertainty of the past weeks returned fully to Dante's side, relieved to see stability restored under leadership they trusted completely. Leonard Pierce, Victor, and several other longtime allies stood firmly beside him as he carefully rebuilt what had nearly been lost. Throughout the process of reclaiming his position, Alina remained a constant, steady presence beside him, no longer hidden away in secrecy, but openly acknowledged as the woman who had refused to leave his side through the darkest days of his life. Their relationship, once carefully guarded from the world, now stood as an undeniable truth that everyone within the organization came to respect deeply. One quiet evening, weeks after Antonio's departure, Dante and Alina sat together on the balcony of his home overlooking the same city that had once believed him gone forever. The lights stretched endlessly before them, a quiet reminder of everything that had nearly been lost and everything that had ultimately been reclaimed. You know, Dante said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, there were moments during those 9 days when I felt myself slipping further away. I don't remember much, but I remember your voice. Somehow, even in the darkness, I could hear you. Alina reached for his hand, holding it gently. I never stopped talking to you. I think some part of me believed if I just kept speaking, kept reminding you of everything waiting for you here, you'd find your way back. I did, Dante replied quietly, because of you. He turned to face her fully, something deeply sincere reflected in his eyes. I've built an empire most people fear, Alina. I've made decisions that carry weight most people could never imagine. But none of that matters if I don't have someone beside me who sees past all of it, someone who stayed not because of what I have, but because of who I am. Alina's eyes filled with quiet emotion as she listened to his words. I never needed any of this, she said softly. I just needed you. Dante reached into his pocket, retrieving a small velvet box he had carried with him for days, waiting quietly for the right moment. He opened it carefully, revealing a simple, elegant ring inside. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly. "This life comes with risks I can never fully erase, but I know I don't want to face any of it without you beside me, openly, permanently, not hidden away in secrecy any longer." Tears slipped freely down Alina's cheeks as she nodded, unable to find words strong enough to match the emotion rushing through her. Dante gently slid the ring onto her finger, sealing a promise built not through the power he held over an empire, but through 9 days of unwavering loyalty that had proven stronger than any threat the world could offer. The city lights glimmered below them, unaware of the quiet, powerful moment unfolding above. Dante Morty, once believed lost forever, had returned not only to reclaim his place in the world, but to finally embrace the one truth that had carried him through his darkest days. Loyalty, real and unshaken, had saved him. And it was loyalty, not power or fear, that would guide him forward from this moment on, with Alina steady beside him, exactly where she had always belonged.